Welcome in, it's Mike from Prep Pros here, and we're going to run through the writing and language section of the April 2022 SAT. Now, if you haven't taken this test, you can find the link to the PDF of it below in the video description. What I really recommend you to do then is to work through a passage, watch the explanations, apply some what you have learned on the next passage, and just continue that process throughout the test. And by the end of working through this test and watching the explanations, you're going to really start to see a lot of patterns in the test and be able to apply a lot of the rules, strategies, tips, and tricks that we're going to talk through. Now, for most students, when they're dealing with the writing and language section, they're really just trying to pick what sounds or looks right. And this, if you have a really good ear, sometimes you may be able to get down to just like 5 or 6 mistakes on the test, but you kind of hit this wall because you're just trying to sound it out, but you don't really know technically why it's right versus wrong. It's a really technical section. It's all about being able to identify which answer choices are right versus wrong because of a very specific set of grammar rules, and also being able to identify the different question types so you know when you're supposed to apply those grammar rules. So we're going to talk through some of those rules as we go through and talk about kind of some of the question types we're encountering and what we're typically looking for. But we're just going to jump right into it here with question 1. Now, the only other thing, just really broad overview advice for the writing and language section, make sure you're always reading all of the passage. Some students try to just jump question to question, but when you get to any context-related questions, you're kind of dead in the water because you have no idea what the paragraph or passage is talking about, and then we're left kind of guessing for those. Now, first question here, this is testing us on sentence structure. I can spot this just because of those periods and the semicolons here. Now, on November 5th, 1966, British artist Tom Phillips was rummaging through a warehouse full of bargain books. This is going to be an independent clause. Our sentence structure questions are pretty much always about identifying the type of clause and using our different rules. Now, I'm not going to run through the whole independent, dependent clause, how to identify them and run through the rules, but this is actually a completely free kind of like mini trial of our course. You can check it out in the link below. You don't need to use a credit card. It is totally free to sign up for, but it's the most foundational element of rules that really makes a huge difference on the SAT. So if this is something you're not familiar with, please check that out. It's totally free. You don't need a credit card. It's really going to help you out. And if you go through that and start coming back to some of these questions, they're going to make a lot more sense. Now, our second half, he found an old hardbound Victorian novel by W.H. Mallock. This is also an independent clause, but we cannot join two independent clauses together with just a comma alone. We'd need period, semicolon, or comma plus fanboys. So that's how we can tell that A is wrong. Now, C and D don't work, even though they have those pieces of punctuation I was talking about, because we've changed the type of clause. Finding an old hardbound Victorian novel by W.H. Mallock. This is a phrase. We can't use a semicolon for an independent clause to a phrase. When finding an old hardbound Victorian novel, same issue here with D. Now, B simply works because what we have is an independent clause followed by a dependent clause. When he found an old hardbound Victorian novel by W.H. Mallock, dependent. If we have independent followed by dependent, we don't need any punctuation. Join the two of them together. Now, question 2 is testing us on subject-verb agreement. So what we always have to simply do is identify our subject, get rid of any extra information or prepositional phrases. The book which Phillips purchased for mere pennies, well, there's our extra information. We want to take that out. Now we can read back through and hear the subject correctly. The book was titled A Human Document. We wouldn't say the book were titled, the book have been, the book are being. This is singular. This is our only singular verb, is the really technical way of thinking about it. And he decided to make the raw material for his next art project a mixed media book of erasure poetry. Now, this is an adding and deleting question, so I'm going to read through the rest of the paragraph so I have plenty of context, because these are about context, they're about relevance, so we want to make sure we're giving ourselves plenty of room as we go through. This project would later bloom into a decades-long obsession as he continued to amend. Well, this is just going to be a word choice question. This makes no sense. Continued to amend the near-forgotten novel into a kaleidoscope work of art. The only word that makes any sense in this context, and this is one of the few places where you kind of just have to know some of the vocab or be able to hear that it's right, we just say transform. Now, we'll go back to this question here. So what we're considering adding here is copies of human document can still be obtained, though the price is more than a few cents now. Well, this paragraph has nothing to do with the price of the book or the value of the book. it's all about basically just like how he's using the book to make his art. So we don't want to add this here, and very clearly we can see that C is correct because it distracts from the focus, right? It's not relevant to the passage's focus on Philip's artistic use of the book here. Now, question 5 here. Which choice most effectively sets up the information in the rest of the sentence? Well, I really want to focus on this part here. So Philip's blank, I don't want to read this the first time through because I don't really know if it's right or wrong. Instead, he would treat it. Well, even though it just directed me to the rest of the sentence here, I need to read a little bit further through for context because I have no idea what the treated is referring to. So in this process, Phillips would open the book to a random page, then erase, cross out, paint over, or otherwise manipulate the text so the carefully selected remaining words would create a unique poetic message. So we're really saying, right, he's just basically using the book for kind of this artistic purpose. He's basically crossing it out, painting it over, and he's just leaving some words alone to make something new out of it here. So Phillips initially worked on the book for over 5 years, has nothing to do with this treat it, which we got explained by the context in the following sentence here. So A is wrong. Noted that the book's text contained a diverse vocabulary. That's not what we're focused on at all. It's not about the different types of words we see. Was unfamiliar with it before buying it. The rest of this, with him treating it and him basically covering up pieces of it to make something new, has nothing to do with his familiarity. He just very clearly, he never planned to read the book because he's just covering up a bunch of words and taking what was on the book to make his own new expressions out of the text. Now, this is just going to be a verb tense question here. So I'll go back through. So in this process, Phillips would open the book to a random page, then erase, cross out, paint over, or otherwise manipulate the text so that the carefully selected remaining words would create a unique poetic message. Well, many of these verb tense questions, it's really hard sometimes for students to put their finger on why tense is right versus wrong. Most of this you'll just be able to hear, but if you're ever stuck, it often has some parallel structure to it. So you're just matching up to a tense later in the sentence. Would open, would create, these two are matching up. That's how we can tell that A is our correct answer there. In one of his earliest treatments, he folded the title of Malik's novel, truncating a human document to a humament. This struck Phillips as a particularly evocative title. Humament was an earthy word, as he put it, with echoes of humanity in monument. So anytime I see transitions, don't want to read this, I just want to think about relationship between the two sentences. Blank, the newly coined word, revealed something of his method, how Phillips would hew his own meaning out of the larger text of a novel, carrying away words like a sculpture carves away stone to reveal a new artwork beneath. Well, we've added basically an additional thought onto what we were dealing with here around humament. So we're looking for some transition, which is going to be showing us we're adding something on. So furthermore is the only one that makes sense here. Question 8 here. So I'm just going to skim through this part silently just to speed the video along here. All right, but 8, this is just looked kind of like a punctuation question for me. So even after he'd treated each of the novel's 367 pages and put a humament on display, first as a unique artwork in 1973 and later as a book published in 1980, Phillips' work wasn't done. Well, don't want to put commas before prepositional phrases about 99% of the time on the test here. But anytime here, because I see some commas here, some commas here, I really want to try to identify what rules these are following. And this is extra information. Also something from the free trial you can learn. It's really all over the test, so it's really, really helpful. But pretty simply here, I can take all of this part of the sentence out and the rest of it works perfectly fine without it. Once I pull it out and it sounds perfectly fine without it, gives me a relatively easy, consistent way without getting to some of the super nitty-gritty details of telling if something's right versus wrong. I can say even after he'd treated each of the novel's 367 pages and put a human on display, Phillips' work wasn't done. That works totally fine on its own. So that actually shows me that I don't need any punctuation here. Not going to get into all of the single dash rules, but this is not following any of our single dash rules. we're not following any of our comma rules with the comma after the and there as well. And we talked about how a is wrong because of the preposition of as. Now, question 9 just immediately looks like an ambiguous pronoun question to me. So once again, I'm going to kind of skim down, but then I'll take a look at this one here. Cool. So issue here is I have no idea what the they is referring to. So as I look back through, I need to see which of these two words are going to be clearly referring to what we've been talking about. Well, we saw this treatment, we saw this treatment. So we're talking about both versions is what we're referring to. Now, question 10, logical placement question here. This is one place that a lot of students really get tripped up. Now, most of you are probably just going through this and trying to do what sounds or looks right, place it in, and just read through. But what you always want to try to do is unpack some clues out of this that are going to give you a black and white location where it has to be. Now, one thing I see here is the he is going to have to be clarified that it's talking about Phillips, but this isn't super helpful in this paragraph because it's all about Phillips. That's not going to really help us, but he returned to a humament again and again. So we're talking about him coming back to it multiple times, and we did see we have these multiple treatments, multiple versions, scouring the text for new opportunities here. So as I'm looking through, what I can really see is this is going to have to be hinting at him coming back multiple times, looking for new opportunities. Now, this rules out A pretty quickly because first treatments were done. Doesn't make sense to him return afterwards. But we're going to start looking really carefully at sentence after sentence 2. Even after he'd treated each of the novels, 367 pages, put a human on display, first as unique artwork in 1973, and later as a book published in 1980, Phillips' work wasn't done. He returned to a human again and again. So this is really clearly following up what we saw at the end of sentence 2, scouring the text for new opportunities. Now, these two treatments here that we see are very clearly referencing those opportunities that we introduced. So that's how I can tell that sentence 2 is going to be correct here. Now, question 11 here. Anytime you see these most effectively or best combines, without getting into all the rules applied here, you often are looking at one of the two shortest answers. These have to be grammatically correct, and you want more concise answers here. So I'll read back through what we currently have. He wrote the introduction to the 6th and final edition. In the introduction, well, this is already redundant with the introduction part. In the introduction, he observed that he'd yet to find a situation, sentiment, or thought which Malick's works cannot be adapted to cover. Introduction, redundant. For the final edition, the 6th, writing in the introduction, this is just some very weird phrasing, but also a bit redundant. For the 6th edition was the final edition. In the introduction, in writing is completely unneeded and repetitive there. D, just our most concise one, is correct here. Writing the 6th and final edition's introduction, he observed that he'd yet to find a situation, sentiment, or thought which Malick's words cannot be adopted to cover. All right, question 12. So anytime I see all of them expressing the same general idea but just differences in length, it's just testing you on wordiness and redundancy. They're all saying the exact same thing, but D is simply the most concise, and it's still grammatically correct. Now, question 13, exact same question we saw at the end of the previous passage, so hopefully this one was a little bit easier for you to get right. University of Maryland geology professor Sujay Kaushal led a study in 2018. In this study, right, there's our redundancy, was the observation that it was that, this is redundant. In a study that was led, it was observed that, redundant. Same thing here, redundant. Our most concise answer is correct here for 13. Not always the shortest, but it's a great place to start. Now, question 14 here. So here we're asked about the main argument of the passage, so we're going to have to read through the entire rest of this passage before going back through these questions here. So we're just going to kind of jump down here. Now, question 15 just looks like another one of these tense questions here. Traditional salinization tests that solely blank on sodium chloride, a salt often used to dice roads, are inadequate in studying the increased salinity and pH of freshwater systems. So here we're saying just solely focus, and are, this is our present tense is matching up to this. We can tell that A is correct here. Now, question 16 here. I'm going to skip reading through the whole passage this time just so we kind of keep the video moving a little bit quicker here. But is Cashell's study shows these effects are widespread in the United States. Well, that gives us a full sentence here. So we can mark this as an independent clause. This is extra information, more specifically a prepositional phrase at the front of the sentence. Now we want to take a look at what we have for the rest. Of the 232 stream and river monitoring sites examined in the study, this is a prepositional phrase or extra information starting the sentence here. 66% showed trends of increasing pH. So we have two full sentences here because we have an independent clause before and independent clause after. So we need to join those properly. Now C, although a semicolon can join two independent clauses, is wrong because we can't say of, comma. This just is not even close to correct. This entire part here is our prepositional phrase, and we just want to have the one comma after it. Now this gets into one of our kind of more advanced grammar rules. You can actually use colons to join two full sentences together when the second one is giving explanation, definition, or clarification for what we talked about in the first one. And that's why B is correct. Now 16 here, this is a great example of a logical placement question, which is a little bit easier because there's a very specific transition that gives away where it has to be placed. While acid rain itself lowers pH, it breaks down minerals containing alkaline salts, ultimately raising pH in the waterways. As we're looking at this one, this is the first thing I immediately start to look for. And I only see acid rain talked about somewhere. So acid rain is going to have to be talked about in the preceding sentence for this to make any sense. That's how I can tell that B is my correct answer there. Question 18 here. This is our subject-verb agreement once again. This one's a little bit simpler. Alkalinization and salinization, that's plural, so we could also plug in they. We could only say they pose. All the other answer choices here, he poses, he has posed, he is posing, the same you could plug in she. Those are all singular. That's how we can tell those are all wrong. 19, this is simply a pronoun agreement question. We see its verse there. Among blank, many effects, we have to identify what we're referring to. Well, we're talking about higher salinities effects. That's a singular thing, so we have to use our singular possessive pronoun, which is its. This is the same as it is. You can't say among it is many effects. Makes no sense at all. Question 20. Which choice most effectively supports the claim being made in the paragraph? Well, here we'll read back through this paragraph together here. So together, alkalinization and salinization blank a double threat to the health of the freshwater ecosystems. And we'll have to remember that we have to come back to this question here, which I know I mentioned earlier, but I just kind of clued myself in again because we haven't read the whole passage yet. But question 20, which choice most effectively supports the claim being made in the paragraph? So we're just focused on this. So we're talking about the double threat. We're talking about the negative effects here of higher salinity, right? We're talking about like it can cause all of these specific effects. Elevated pH, meanwhile. So we want to be looking for something similar because the claim of this paragraph is talking about the negative effects of alkalization and salinization. pH could have several causes such as changes in weathering, fertilizers, or even process of photosynthesis. It's talking about the causes, not the effects of it. So I can tell that A is wrong. Was slightly mitigated in some areas following the clean. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Can cause ammonium, a nutrient already present in water, to convert into toxic ammonia gas, resulting in decreased biodiversity. There's our correct answer. We're talking about the negative causes of this. Is the opposite of acidification and once again, you get to use the rest of the paragraph for context. That previous one talking about the causes really helps me identify what I'm looking for there. Now, question 21 here. So this is testing us on sentence structure and one little test trick. If you see one answer choice with a period and one with a semicolon, and there's no difference between the two of them in terms of other punctuation, they're both automatically wrong. Now, more technically here, this is all about our clauses. Due to the linked ecological and biological costs of high salt concentrations and high pH in freshwater systems, that's a dependent clause. Scientists must consider both when assessing a freshwater ecosystem's overall health. Independent clause. If you went through that little free stuff I popped in below, you would know dependent followed by independent, we have to place a comma between the two of them. Now, we're going to go back to question 14, and then we're going to deal with 22 here. Which choice most effectively sets up the main argument of the passage? Well, what we've really been talking about here is we're just talking about how basically, although everybody's just focused on salinization, there is this whole big other issue of alkalinization, and the current studies are focused just on the one salt, but we really need to start to focus on all these other ones because they have all these other effects. So given the environmental threat of what Cauchy terms freshwater salinization syndrome, it is imperative that scientists blank when studying waterway salinization. What we're talking about, we need to be considering these other factors. This is the main one. That's why A is correct here. This is not the main argument that it's just prevalent in a specific area. We'd really have to see them talking about different areas where we get this effect, and one is the most important for us to address. Same thing here. This is not the main argument as we're going through in the passage. It's that we need to start to pay attention to alkalization and these other effects as well. And this one here really is going to most likely lead us into question 22. Which one provides the most effective conclusion here? So we'll read back to this previous sentence. This is not to say that existing salinization studies are invalid. Sodium chloride remains an important source of salinization, requires monitoring, but so do pH increasing salts. So we're talking about this alkalinization portion that we talked about earlier. So we really need to be going outside of just what we've been studying and starting to consider and use this study from Cauchy to help us consider these other effects here. In fact, Cauchy points out that adding one type of salt to an environment can actually encourage mobilization of other kinds of salts, exacerbating the freshwater salinization syndrome. This is not what we've really been focusing on throughout the rest of the passage. According to Cauchy, many cities have inefficient salt spreading. It's not about the equipment at all that's causing the issue. We'll take a look at D, which is also wrong. Ultimately, Cauchy notes salinization and alkalinization could not only affect freshwater ecosystems. We did not talk about coastal regions at all, but C is correct here because what Cauchy's freshwater salinization syndrome provides is a critical conceptual framework that can help scientists make more effective use of existing research and design better studies in the future. We have to start considering these other effects that haven't been focused on. That's how we can tell that C is correct. All right, for our third passage here. So once again, I already read through this one just to keep the video a little bit shorter here after going through the whole first one together. So I'm just going to bounce question to question here. So question 23, this is going to be a sentence structure question. We see our fanboys, we see a semicolon here. So however many customers are concerned about the trustworthiness of anonymous customer appraisals or simply overwhelmed by the countless often conflicting reviews. This is an independent clause. There is growing demand for the objective, reputable reviews provided by a professional reviewing service. Independent clause. So D, A don't properly join our independent clauses. Either B or C word. But here we're saying because of this first thing, the second thing is happening. So we have to use the word so. Now that doesn't make any sense because we'd have to be seeing some sort of like time transition. 24 is just a word choice question here. Those who enjoy trying new products and sharing their opinions may even consider becoming professional reviewers who conduct, we wouldn't say sizable product research, we're saying we're conducting like very in-depth stuff, which means extensive product research. Is the example of David Heim, who worked for more than 25 years at Consumer Reports, a leading review service. Anytime I see dashes, I always want to check to see if I just need to add another dash. What I can simply see here is I can go ahead and I can get rid of all of this information between the two of them because our dashes are extra information. Is the example of David Heim, when you have two of them, shows the field is ideal for those who want to use expertise to provide honest information to consumers while learning about the latest technologies. We can pull all of that out between the two dashes, so that's how we can tell that C is correct. Now 26, once again, we've seen a few of these already in the test, so hopefully you're starting to get a lot more comfortable with these. This is just pronoun agreement. It's versus there. We have to figure out if it's singular or plural, what we're referring to. Professional review services like Consumer Reports, the Wirecutter, the Sweet Home. So we're talking about offer expert advice. We're talking about all these different websites, so it's plural. So it has to be their technicians run tests on products is we're going through. Question 27 here. So this is on verb tense here. So I see present, past, present, future. So you have to see what we're seeing in the rest of the sentence to start with, and we could expand our context if we don't feel comfortable based off that sentence. Heim recalls, for example, a time in the 1990s when managing editors at his company held a meeting, right? All this is past tense, to discuss a product many, it'd have to be, had not even heard of. This is going to be past tense. 28, which choice best introduces the main point of the paragraph? Well, here we always have to go through, read the entirety of the paragraph. So here we'll just kind of run back through this one together. Professional reviewers' commitment to fairness and accuracy should be particularly appealing to consumers since, according to market research, blank. For example, a 2014 study found that 50% of those surveyed believed that. We'll just stop and do these questions as we're going through. Now, anytime I see that phrases on the SAT, they are always essential. You're pretty much never placing commas before or after the word that unless we're applying one of our other grammar rules. So we can have punctuation before or after it, but it can't be for these types of phrases. And here we're simply saying believed that. This is all our essential phrase describing what it was. This comma here is not used for extra information. It's used to join our two independent clauses together. So here we simply don't need any punctuation. We have a that phrase. It's essential, so we're not placing any commas there. The individuals surveyed also thought that businesses write positive reviews of their own products or services, with 43% of respondents saying this happens sometimes and 21% saying it happens often. So we'll come back to these ones after just kind of reading back through the rest. And even when they did not suspect direct interference from business respondents, blank 48% thought individuals sometimes write online reviews without purchasing the products or services, and 16% thought this occurs often. So we're really just saying here is we have this big issue of people not trusting on any sort of online reviews. So once we pick that up, it becomes pretty clear that D is the only one that is addressing that at all. Now, question 30. The writer wants to use accurate information from the graph to support the point made earlier in the sentence. So it has to be accurate and support what we're talking about. So our point we made earlier, we'll read back through to make sure I'm not missing anything. The individuals surveyed also thought that businesses write positive reviews of their own products or services. So we're talking about businesses writing reviews, with 43% of respondents saying this happens sometimes, and 21% saying this happens often. So we're talking here about just this part of the graph, businesses writing positive reviews about their own products or services. Well, 21 did not say it happened often. That was 36% said it happened often. That's how we can see that C is correct. 9% say it happens rarely. 9% said it happens never. 11% say it never happens. That would be our rarely part. You have to be really careful when you're looking at the graphs and charts for these questions. Question 31, which choice offers an accurate interpretation of the graph? So, and even when they did not suspect direct interference from the businesses, respondents blank. So we have to be looking at the part of the graph that doesn't have to do with the businesses. So this is going to have to be about individuals writing online reviews without having purchased the product or service. So it has to be accurate from that one. And even when they did not suspect direct interference from the business, respondents rarely considered whether reviews were honest. Well, that's not what we're saying, because we're saying we also have this concern about individuals writing reviews without having purchased them. So that wouldn't be that they rarely considered that. Preferred products or services with higher number of reviews, not in there. Did not purchase products or services with fraudulent reviews. This is not about the purchasing behavior. It's just about how often people think certain things happen. But it's B here, had doubts about the validity of customer reviews, because this entire rest of the graph is just talking about people having written reviews without having purchased the product, which means the review can't be valid. Now, question 32 here. Which choice provides the best transition from the information in the previous paragraph? Well, this entire previous paragraph was just giving us lots of evidence about the need for product reviews that customers can trust. So that's how we can pretty clearly tell that A is our correct answer here. we're not saying despite these drawbacks, because we're not going against them or whatever the format, or on the other hand, we're basically saying like, because of what we've seen, there's a growing need for product reviews that consumers can trust. Now, question 33. This always trips a lot of students up because you're like, how can I spot the style in the tone? This is really basically just code words for you want concise answers, and you don't want to use really informal language here. So, though it can be challenging to maintain the expertise needed to make informed evaluations, those excited about getting a cool gig, well, this sounds fine if we're talking to our friends, but definitely not. It doesn't have to be crazy formal, but it can't be that informal. Snagging a job, that's very informal. Acquiring employment at the forefront, this is just like excessively wordy here. B is going to be the only one which is concise. It's using proper types of language here. That's how we can tell that B is our right answer. All right, question 34 here and the rest of the last passage. So here, because I see follows in the paragraph and then the passage, this is what I'm going to save for last. I may have a really good idea after this paragraph, but I still want to give myself more context. So 35 here, this is just a idiom question. It's just whichever one kind of like, it's the way we typically say something. The law of supply and demand, for example, which holds that a supply of an item increases, its price decreases, assumes that each shopper will strive to pay. We don't say as small as possible. We just say as little as possible. Now, question 36, another one of these most effectively combines, right? So has to be grammatically correct, but we're also looking for more concise. Now, one other little secret to these, the answer choice with the semicolon has never been correct for this particular question type. From the 19th century until quite recently, there was this rational economic man, Homo economicus. He formed the basic of most economic policies. This rational economic man, Homo economicus, formed the basis of most economic models. This looks really good so far, expressing the exact same idea. We're making this exact same part extra information. We've just gotten rid of the he, which is repetitive here. Economic man being the, if you ever see like being the, this just isn't good phrasing, so we can eliminate that. Homo economicus was a rational economic man and formed the basis of most economic models here. Now, be here a little bit more concise, and we're also making this part extra information the same way we originally did. This is making this part rational economic. This is basically kind of like extra information for this. So we're taking that away. Those are really kind of our two reasons we can see that B is correct here. Now, 37, which choice provides the most effective transition from the previous paragraph to the information that follows in the sentence here? Well, information that follows in the sentence. According to scholars in the emerging field of behavioral economics, humans aren't rational. Well, the whole first part was saying they just make these rational decisions. So we have to show some sort of contrast here, which is just going to be saying there was just one problem. All of these other ones are not quite showing that contrast and talking about how what we previously said is not right based off what we're seeing in this sentence. Now we get a transition, so it's all about previous sentence to the rest of the sentence. I ignore what's currently in there. In the real world, people make irrational economic decisions all the time. Studies of savings behavior show that many workers choose not to enroll in retirement savings plans offered by their employers, even when these plans are, right, so this is going to be a word choice question we'll get to in a second, in the worker's interest. So here, we're just giving an example of people making irrational decisions, so the only one that is used for an example is going to be D. Now, 39 here ostentatiously makes no sense when we're talking about being in someone's interest. We're just saying overwhelmingly where they're really in the interest of the workers here. Question 40 here. All right, looks like sentence structure again. So we've got a little bit of tricky punctuation here as well. So let's go back, read the whole thing. When the default option, now we've got a lot of extra information here. That is the choice that requires no direct action to be taken. So we can take all of this out to make our life a little bit easier. That's just extra information. So when the default option is to not enroll in a plan, well, that's a dependent clause. Now, if we have a single dash, because these two dashes are already paired up, we always have to have an independent clause before it. So that's how I can tell that A is wrong. We cannot have a dependent clause before a period. We cannot have a dependent clause before a comma and a fanboy. Many employees don't sign up as an independent clause. Dependent to independent, hopefully went through that free little mini course part. You always need a comma between the two of them. Now 41, some punctuation stuff here. Here, I already see one dash up here. There's a good chance I just need a second dash if I can take all that out. However, when the default option is enrollment, that is when companies automatically sign workers up for a plan and require them to take direct action to enroll. Far more workers make the decision to save for retirement. Let's just see if we can take all of this out. However, when the default option is enrollment, far more workers make the decision to save for retirement. That works perfectly. We can just take all that out. Question 42 here. All right, we have to go back to this page. In a 2013 study, Catherine Milkman and two co-authors examined what they called temptation building. Well, if we stop there, that's going to give us an independent clause. So far A looks good. We always need an independent clause before a colon. Now we could get a list of items, explanation, definition, clarification. Call what they call temptation building, tying a so-called want experience, in this case listening to a favorite audiobook, with a so-called should behavior. So this is giving us an explanation, definition, clarification of what that temptation building is. So we'll just check our other ones. Now B is wrong because if we say temptation, bundling, tying, we no longer have an independent clause. We can't stop reading there. Same issue with C here. We don't have an independent clause before our semicolon. D, tying a so-called want experience with a so-called should behavior, right? This part, we don't have an independent clause, so that's why D is wrong. A is right, independent followed by explanation, definition, clarification. Now 43, which choice provides an example that is most consistent with the other information in the sentence in the paragraph? Well, here in tie a want experience, we're given an example of what that is with a so-called should behavior. This is not an example of a should behavior. Audiobooks were available to them while they exercised, not a should behavior. A behavior they might not enjoy, well, that would maybe be it, but this is giving us a very specific example of the thing, so we want to see another specific example. 44, this just looks like verb tense here, so we'll read back through the sentence. Milkman found that participants who limited their audiobook listening time spent at the gym worked out 51% more frequently than the control participants, and 61% of those in the experimental group even blank. Well, so we saw limited, spent, so this has to be past tense. That's why purchased is going to be correct here. If we can use a simpler past tense, we can here over like had purchased without getting into all the nitty-gritty verb stuff here, we want to do so. That's why A is correct. Now we'll just go back to question 34 here. Which choice best sets up the information that follows in the paragraph and the passage here? Classic economic theory is predicated on a bedrock assumption about human behavior. People make economic decisions not based on general principles, rationally and in their own self-interest. Because what we saw in the rest of this, we talked about that here. The rest of the passage was talking about how this really isn't the case. So that's how we can see that C is our correct answer. Now, I hope this has been really helpful for getting you more comfortable with some of these question types, some of the stuff you see really consistently, which gets a lot easier once you know how to handle them. If this has, please like and subscribe. If you guys have any questions about the writing and language section, drop them in the comments below. As I said, please check out the free part of the course. It gives you a big foundation on your sentence structure as well as your extra information. You don't need a credit card. It's totally free to sign up. And I'm also dropped some other helpful resources below.